I thank the chairman. Try to be brief. Mr. Comer, this is the United States Congress, right? The United States of America.
Yes, sir.
Is D.C. a state?
No, sir.
Under the Constitution of the United States, was D.C. contemplated to be the capital seat?
Yes, sir.
Is it the capital seat of the
Yes,
United
sir.
States? Do we therefore have a particularly unique interest as the Congress representing the people of the United States in ensuring that the capital of the United States is functioning properly and is being managed in ways that we think appropriate as Congress, both in terms of crime and in terms of those who are voting here in the capital seat of the United States?
Yes, sir. We have a constitutional role to do that.
What if people want D.C. to be a state, and my friend from Maryland and I have sparred over this and oversight and had some good conversations about it, maybe even the judiciary too, I can't remember. If some folks want it to be a state, that is a debate that has been ongoing, but it is nevertheless currently not a state. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So to my friend from Maryland, I would ask you a question that in '93, in the Law Review piece in which you advocated for non-citizens voting in local elections, you stated it would be difficult to allow non-citizens to vote in state elections because the U.S. Constitution categorically makes all persons enfranchised in state legislative elections into federal electors, and alien participation in national elections presents. I get kind of what you mean there, but can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, when I looked at the whole question and what Lincoln, how Lincoln got elected and how, it was controversial because people were saying that the immigrant vote counted, it just seemed to me that there are very, powerful countervailing considerations against allowing that to happen. But at the local level, if I've got a Canadian neighbor, presumably he and his family have the same interest in efficient garbage collection and good schools as everybody else does. So I think that has always been left up to local communities to decide who should vote in local elections. And the logic of that seems to me to be fine.
Would that be consistent with the logic that D.C. should be a city and not a state?
Well, I mean, that obviously presents a different question. And, what you posed to Chairman Comer, the words District of Columbia did not appear in the Constitution or Washington, D.C., nor was the geography of the capital city set in the Constitution. It just says in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, that Congress shall exercise exclusive legislation over the district that is to become the seat of government in land yielded by the states. And so it could have been Philadelphia, it could have been Annapolis, it could have been New York. Different parts of the country were vying for it, and there's, of course, nothing freezes it today. The question for us is whether we think that simply living in the capital city and breathing the same air as members of Congress entitles you to disenfranchisement and not having representation in Congress. And I don't think any of us would consent to that proposition for people that we represent.
Well, again, without going to the D.C. statehood debate, I mean, those states are states in our union, right? And therefore have that enfranchisement that was considered in forming the union. From states
for
up through
13
the
of
union.
them.
But with respect to the district, the argument is that we have 435 of us here to decide what is in the best interest of the nation, including having a capital city seat of government. People can live here, and they could choose to live in that structure. I think the question before us right now is it's a pretty simple one, is whether the capital city, the national seat of government, should allow people who are non-citizens to vote. I think that's the question. And I think the question is a reasonable one that, to respond to the ranking member, I've had many constituents ask about it. I've had many constituents raise the issue and raise the question and concern about it. I've had many constituents and people who live in D.C. raise the issue about the safety and crime and issues of concern here in the District of Columbia. It's not a unimportant issue, I think, for the vast majority of Americans who want their capital city to be safe. They want their capital city to reflect their values as well, and believing that it's important for it to be citizens who vote, and particularly given the lack of exemptions for diplomats and other individuals that are here in the city. But I guess I would just, for time's sake, I'll probably just move on from that position, but I would just remind us that at the end of the day, we have a duty here. And the one last question I'd have for Mr. Comer is, do you believe that regardless of the outcome of this vote, that the appropriations process and the power of the purse is another important avenue to consider with respect to how taxpayer dollars are used with respect to the business carried out by the capital city of the United States of America?
Absolutely, 100%. Yes.
I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, is recognized for whatever questions he cares to address to the panel.
Thank the chairman. Ranking Member Raskin, you weren't proposing that we go back when you extolled the virtues of allowing people who weren't citizens to vote because they own property. You're not suggesting to go back to those rules, are you?
No, I was just trying to explain the history of it, because for most of our history and in most of our states, non-citizens have been granted the right to vote, just like non-citizens.
If they owned property?
Well, no, not exclusively. Like, there was a period called declarant alien suffrage before the Civil War, where the rule in most of the Midwestern states, like Minnesota and the Western states, was if you declared that you were on the pathway to citizenship, they would allow you to vote, either in local elections or local, state, and federal, depending on that.
If these provisions that were passed by the local DC elected officials went into place, is it true that an illegal immigrant who's a felon could vote in DC?
This I don't know. You might be more versed in the legislation than me. I don't know. Most of the jurisdictions that have it, it's for non-citizens who are lawfully present. For example, in Maryland, a bunch of local jurisdictions in Montgomery County allow it because there are a lot of foreign diplomatic people and embassy personnel and people work at the World Bank and the IMF, and they've always been allowed to vote in their local school board elections and stuff like that.
But it would allow illegal immigrants to vote in DC?
I just can't answer. I don't know. All non-citizens. So I assume if they were willing to dare to put their name on a public list like that, it sounds like under the DC proposal they could do it.
Do you have an estimate of how many illegal immigrants are in DC?
I do not know that.
Mr. Comer, Chairman Comer, do you have an estimate of the number of illegal immigrants in DC and who might be able to vote because of this?
The Washington Post thinks 50,000. That's what the Washington
50,000, okay. And isn't it true that felons can vote under the DC rules that are?
I'm advised yes.
It seems to me like we could be in a situation, unless it's expressly prohibited, where illegal immigrants who are felons can actually vote in local elections. That seems pretty darn inclusive. Is that something you support, Ranking Member Raskin?
George Santos is in Congress, man, so it's a big country. And, put it this way, they cannot vote in D.C. in federal elections. So they would not be able to vote for Eleanor Holmes Norton or to run for the non-voting delegate position. It's only in local elections, as I understand it.
Chairman Comer, what's Mayor Bowser's position on the legislation that we're disputing here today with these two resolutions?
She vetoed the voting rights. She vetoed the criminal code. She vetoed the criminal code. She just didn't sign the voting rights. So she didn't support either bill. And the unions, police unions are supportive of both of our resolutions and opposed to DC's bill. So.
Why do you think the police unions, who presumably they vote in DC as well, and support home rule, why would they be opposed to
They
this?
don't believe that this legislation will do anything but increase the crime rate, which is increasing every day. They think it's too lenient. I'm sorry. Too lenient. That's why the police union's opposed to it. And then, talking about the courts, the jury trials and stuff, Congress does have a constitutional role to oversee DC legislation. And we fund the judiciary in Washington, D.C. That's funded by Congress. So, you know, we do have a say in this, and I think that if you listen and, you know, the Washington Post, the mayor, the law enforcement union, they're all opposed to what the DC Council has done and supportive of what these two resolutions are.
Mr. Raskin, you're not suggesting that what we're doing here by reviewing what the DC elected officials have chosen and passing a resolution to countermand it, to undo it, you're not suggesting what we're doing here is unconstitutional, are you?
No, I don't think it's unconstitutional. But that's why people want statehood. I mean, I think most people on the panel represent states that used to be jurisdictions that could get kicked around by Congress routinely on matters, and they don't even, you know, get to speak for themselves. So I just think as a matter of basic democratic civic respect, we should allow them to have their laws. These are, you know, some of these provisions in the criminal justice code provision, as I showed just looking at one, carjacking, are far more stringent than those in states that we represent. And you know, the non-citizen voting thing also, as I said, is existed
I
in a lot of places.
understand your preferences.
These are not my policy preferences, by the way. My only preference is for us to stay out of it and let them have.
I understand that's a preference of yours, but Mr. Comer, Chairman Comer makes a great point that this is our constitutional authority and prerogative here to review what they've done. In fact, what we've done to let them go ahead and elect folks and vote on these things is more than the Constitution granted them. It's not prohibited in the Constitution to let them do this, but it's certainly reserved, and until the Constitution changes, and I know you would prefer statehood, but we don't have statehood. So in the absence of statehood, we have the Constitution as it stands, and this is our prerogative to vote on this. And I support these two measures, and I support the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez, recognized for questions.